Hello and welcome. First, I want to say thank you all so much for your support on my last video. It inspired me to have a video do well and be received well without sort of rage baiting conservatives. And so I want to share another thing that I kind of have a passion for. It's electricity. On this channel, I've talked about how as a child I went into a science fair and, well, I think the medal speaks for itself. I kind of swept the competition away because I built a little spark machine and tested what a conductor was and what an insulator was. And it was probably the most work I've ever done at that point in my life. As a, 7-year-old, I think 3 or 4 weeks of putting together a science fair project, that might as well have been an entire professional career in academia. And even still, as an adult, electricity still eludes me in a way that perhaps I've always been chasing the forbidden spark, not just in the taste of the 9-volt battery, but also in trying to understand what exactly electricity is. And recently, I've been looking at some history. I'll leave a link down below to a physics video that talks about how electricity and magnetism are the same. It'll give you a good background on some of the physics behind what I'm going to talk about. And then I'm also going to link, I think her name is Kathy Loves Physics, and she actually went through and did a pretty comprehensive history of electricity as it was studied from the magnet point to modern day. And it's strange because in my mind, I learned in the Navy about electromagnetism and wave propagation so I could create an antenna. And in that study, we had an electric theory study that we had to do where we learned things like electricity flows from negative to positive, or the basic definitions that kind of outline circuit layouts. But when I was studying the history of electricity, I thought to myself, before they had electricity, how did they even begin to study it? And the answer is a Leyden jar. And for those of you that stuck around till the end of my last video, I said, I want to make a video every week. That kind of went out the window because the Leyden jar began to fascinate me. And I've been studying it intently, and now I have some really out there ideas about the way the world works. And it's unfortunate. Anytime I try to explain the mysteries of the universe, I start to sound like a mad scientist. But I'm not a mad scientist. I'm absolutely thrilled at the things I've discovered. It's just that I have no means of proving what I'm going to claim. And so instead of working in the scientific realm with theories and experiments, today I kind of want to share some of the pictures of the spark, and then I want to share, well, I guess you could call it an original modern alchemical tale about electricity. Because we are, I don't know what that was. I'm sorry, I think I just knocked a Leyden jar over. My bad. I got the ground scattered in saltwater batteries right now. Oh, the thing is, with the Leyden jar, it captures static electricity out of the air, and then it creates a magnetic sort of pole on two sides of a conductive material, and then it's capable of discharging to the capacitive element on the outside, which is a foil, but that foil is charged with the ambient magnetic properties of the Earth. And that being said, I think what's happening in a Leyden jar is much more akin to a transistor than it is a capacitor. But even still, I don't necessarily need to get too far into that. I think the big revelation I had, the big thing I'd like people to take away, is electricity doesn't take the path of least resistance, as I once thought as a wee lass. Electricity makes the path of least resistance. And to illustrate this, I kind of want to talk about where does the term electricity come from? The Greeks back in the day had a strange stone, but not quite a stone, and this stone, when rubbed, would produce some sort of magic energy about it, this static force that they couldn't quite see, but they could feel. And electromagnetism is the way in which energy is propagated through all of the universe. We exist as stardust, as Carl Sagan said it. Even as a kid, I think I was fascinated by things like Einstein's thought experiment, where he considered writing a wave of light. And in writing a wave of light, he realized you must be traveling faster than the speed of light in order to travel at the speed of light, because the electron is oscillating back and forth in this sinusoidal pattern around the nucleus. And because of this oscillation that occurs, we can measure a sine wave in alternating current. And when we see that sine wave, what we're seeing is actually the orbit of the electron around a nucleus. Now, is that true or not? Who knows? I don't know. I work for a school district doing electronics, and yeah, maybe I'm full of shit. I mean, I'm just Chloe, the random person. Actually, sorry, we're speaking alchemically. I am Chloe Trismegista, thrice great. In the past, I was great. And then I was born, and they called me another name. And then I found the spark of life, and I was great once more. And then the world took that spark from me, and I found it again, because even at my lowest, I will pursue that which is great, because I am Chloe Trismegista, thrice great. Sorry, that's a Hermes reference. If you read the Emerald Tablet, I'm pretty sure the guy's talking about electricity. That whole as above, so below. Interestingly enough, if you consider a cloud discharging lightning into the ground, the difference of potential equalizes at that discharge, unless there's residual energy left in there, which, if you consider water floating in the atmosphere, is the air ionized? Who knows? But you have this water rubbing up against it, and water's a polar molecule because the oxygen is attracting two hydrogens, and that being the case, that means it's going to attract various electrons in the substance that it's floating within, so long as there are ions freely available. In the Leyden jar experiment, a lot of people see it set up with salt water as a conductive element on the inside, and then the jar itself is the storage device for the energy in the capacitor. But we might be getting a little too far into the weeds on electricity, because I haven't even gotten to the origin of the universe. You see, as a child, I had a favorite comic book hero named the Atom. Ray Palmer was his name. Well, his secret identity. Well, his human identity, his secret identity was the Atom, I suppose. But he was a scientist, and he found a collapsed white dwarf star, which had this property about it that he couldn't quite explain. It was something magical that sort of would cause the electron field around an atom to collapse inward, reducing the size of things to almost a percentage of what it was. But this meant that the white dwarf star had an issue because he couldn't store it anywhere because it was shrinking everything. And anyway, one day his girlfriend asks him out on a trip to examine a cave, and there's a rock collapse that occurs, and it just so happens that Ray had his magic meteorite rock, and so he uses it as a lens to reflect light into him and absorbs the power of the collapsed white sun that was shrinking things. He becomes shrunken down. He's able to go on the outside of the collapsed rocks and then free his girlfriend and the expedition team. Now, that being said, that's not necessarily why I love the Atom. There's one frame in particular that always struck me, because being capable of shrinking down incredibly small, the Atom wasn't immune to the challenges of the world. The Atom actually wasn't really successful in sort of his endeavors personally. He had to be a superhero to help his girlfriend because every time he proposed to his girlfriend, she would reject him. She didn't want to be married. She wanted to focus on her career and sort of like be settled in her life before she took time to establish a family. And Ray, with this ulterior motive of wanting to marry his girlfriend, begins fighting crime. Crime defined as those on the opposite side of his girlfriend's prosecution team because his girlfriend was a lawyer. And so that's why he's doing what he's doing. He's not doing it out of a general moral good. He's doing it because he's pursuing this person in his life. And I think that that's something fascinating because showing a hero that struggles with something so human makes it relatable. There was a scene in there, though, where as a shrunken version of himself, he overhears his friends talking. And his friends are talking about what a terrible friend Ray Palmer is, you know, and how they don't really like him. And so Ray, instead of confronting his friends in that moment, shrinks down and he is exploring the atomic world in his sort of understanding. And he says, "You hide from trouble, you hide from the solutions. You put up solid walls and never think you need windows. They're so private, so impregnable. And yet, you can never clearly see trouble coming." And I think, even as I think of it now, it resonates. Because for a long time, I wasn't even willing to see myself, and yet I was willing to try and understand a universe that I exist within. And in Alchemy, one of the transmutations that takes place is of the mind. You can't transmute metals to ascend them without first conquering your own sense of what you're looking for, and your understanding of self has to be firm. Otherwise, you'll be corrupted by the magnificent power available to you. I live in a home, and this isn't just how my studio is. All of my windows have these curtains on them, and for what? What am I hiding for? And I think that's kind of what the atom is talking about, is we don't need to hide. The world is made plain before us thanks to the magic of electromagnetism. And that's where we get into the story of the electron and the magnet. Because if we consider what an atom is, there is a positive charge and a neutral charge. And the electron, this seemingly massless particle, exists in a cloud surrounding this, this nucleus. So if we begin, well, many moons ago, well, before there was a moon, before there was a sun, before anything existed, and there was just the void, the space between atoms, the ether with which we constantly are traversing at light speed stationarily, because we exist in the world as matter, and all matter is electromagnetism. Because in this place, before all of existence, there was simply the electron and the magnet, and this positive and neutral charge, this magnet, because if you have a positive charge and a neutral charge, you have a difference of potential that exists. You have some form of voltage stored in there. Einstein sort of was able to capture it with his famous equation, E equals mc squared. And something about that equation, I started to think about it. Mass is just energy over the speed of light squared. Because if you consider the speed of light as this infinitely large sort of like speed, and then you place it in an accelerative manner as it oscillates while traveling the speed of light up and down and all around, because it's an electron so orbiting this nucleus, the world is full of magic. We are the stuff of stars powered by electricity. Essentially, a series of resistors and transistors and capacitors and transformers. Our eyes are made of cones and rods. You know what else is made of cones and rods? Transformers trying to receive electromagnetic radiation. And our eyes are optically bending the light in order to perceive it in a way that we can make sense of. And that is the world we know. It's the world we see, the world we feel, or that our body tells us we feel, because the sensation of touch is merely an electrical signal sent from your skin to your brain, telling you along a certain path that reads it that there is a sensation of touch there. All we can ever know is the electromagnetism. And in this place where the positive and neutral charge sits discontented with itself, it can't tell where it stops being positive. There is no defining point. It feels so alone and no one understands it because it's just sitting there trying to figure itself out, but it doesn't know where its positivity ends and where its neutrality begins. And on the one side, it's really happy to be here, and on the other side, it doesn't quite understand why it is here. And then it met the electron, a negatively charged particle, spinning so fast that all of the positive charge is held within it. There is no positive charge even remaining, because that positive charge exists only in the beauty of the electron's dance as it slows itself into this spherical object of radiation condensed. And this negative charge sees the positive charge, and it sees nothing but beauty, because negative charges are drawn to that difference of potential. It sees the difference of potential between the positive side of the magnet and the neutral side of the magnet. And when the two collide, the electron looks to the magnet and it says, "You know you're so beautiful." And the magnet sits there and receives the compliment, and it doesn't know what to do with such a kind phrase. It's sitting there trying to process this idea that maybe it feels wrong, but the world isn't wrong because it can be right. It just never knew that there was a more negative particle than it to relatively measure its neutrons out of. And with this, it asks one simple question. When you say you love me, where does that love end? Can you show it on my body? And this proton and neutron, this magnet, this simple rudimentary form of all matter, sees the electron receive this question, and the electron smiles, and all it does is dance. And as it dances on the nucleus of the atom, the nucleus begins to shift and turn, and the nucleus begins to realize there is no end to the positive and neutral. There is simply that which is positive in a current state and that which is neutral in another state. But the electron begins moving so fast that as the magnet tries to comprehend what's happening in this cloud of negativity around it, it begins to realize it doesn't matter where the separation of its own voltage potential exists, because that difference of potential with the world around it is far greater than that which exists inside. Because we live in a beautiful world, but if we let ourselves get caught up in what we think of the world, we aren't exhibiting the life that the world has blessed us with. And life is, well, nothing more than that spark which gives the atom its composition. It's the union of the magnet and the electron into this one entity, which then becomes a polarized object. And when we consider what's happening when a spark passes from one object to another, could you consider perhaps if in that moment the electricity is ionizing the atoms of the air into a positive charge, and it's pulling all those positive charges around so intensely close that there then becomes a void through which the electrons are guaranteed instantaneous travel because they're not bound to the bouncing that occurs in the atmospheric conditions of like the standard air that we breathe. And so this spark is capable of jumping only because between the two nodes that are put for the Leyden jar, the spark is able to pull the air towards it. The positive aspects of the air, I should say. The elements of the air that allow it to be charged magnetically, ionized. And so we have this polar idea, this more positive and less positive, and these relative measurements of charge with one another. But when we get into the polar and the ion, I was curious what would occur if we mixed a ionized solution with a polar solution just to witness how the magnetism takes place. As electricity was getting its name, amber was the origin because the Greek term for amber was electra. And I went to a rock store the other day and found a rock that isn't a rock. And I took some shavings because the rock exhibits some strange properties. It's one of the fundamental sort of like fossilized relics of history that hide the mysteries of the universe in plain sight. Because when you make a solution to produce the elements where life would potentially exist, you would need something of a sulfur and something of a salt, some kind of mercurial agent to bind the two. The alchemists say you mix fire, water, air, and earth. And I think in the Emerald Tablet, when Hermes is referring to it's born in the sun and the mother is the moon, the reason for that is because the sun is emitting the source of light and the moon is gravitationally affecting the tides of the earth, altering the current that is ambiently traveling through the air, which perhaps we see it and perhaps we don't. Perhaps it's that mysterious essence which gives the magical nature of Earth. But maybe the Earth is just a Leyden jar. And so in my saltwater solution, I, separated the air and the water with some mineral spirits, and then I mixed in some sugar. And I don't know what started to happen, but it looked like the sugar began to form networks with one another. And let me say one more electrical theory before I begin to wrap up. Resistors in series operate additively, but when you put them in parallel, they operate as the reciprocal sum of the reciprocal of the sum of reciprocals for each resistive element. Meaning if you have 100 ohms on a resistor and you put it in series, you'll have 200 ohms for the circuit. But if you put them in parallel, you'll have 1 over 100 plus 1 over 100, and it'll exhibit 50 ohms. It's like magic. I can't fully explain it. Ohm's law does a good job, and physicists do a good job. But when these sugar molecules were reassembling in accord with the amber's magnetic properties, they begin to form these clouded substances, and I'll see if you can see that. And they began to sort of not create single strands, but they would create multiple strands and then fold inward onto itself. And so I think that what I've stumbled upon is one of the foundational elements of all life. Because if we have those conditions where we have an ionized air, a saltwater earth, a magnetic core of molten iron spinning very fast, pulled by the moon because of the gravity of the moon's orbit, and then the sun buffets that beautiful blue planet with its electromagnetic radiation, all we need is a single spark. And that's us. We are the instantaneous travel at the smallest point in time as we experience ourselves through the universe. And even with all these revelations, I'm sure people will still misgender me and not really give a shit about what I have to say, so... Sometimes I wonder why I always get so, like, worked up and nervous about talking, but I think at the end of the day, the universe is fascinating, and I wish more people considered how fascinating it is before they wrote off other people in ways that reflect, well, poorly on them. Uh, I don't know how to process it yet. I think I'm growing, but anyway, sorry, I don't mean to get sad at the end there. There are many mysteries of the universe, and we are here to discover them all. I will not sit for this, well, unless I'm filming a video, because I'm not going to stand for these. Anyway, in the future, I hope to be able to demonstrate what I'm suggesting with my Leyden jar, but I'm still working on it. And I just wanted to share a quick update because I'm so ecstatic. It's incredible to have you here, and I don't even know how to process it properly, but it's the best problem I've ever had. And I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. I love you, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.